Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 15 of Life Lessons and Combat Sports. Eric Hamidi, as usual, and this is the last installment of MMA. Got one more for you guys before this month is out. And like I said in the last episode, I've kind of known what I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to keep up with that. And the trend of having that through line through all these episodes, it continues even with this one, just given the fact that, I really want to shed some light on a certain individual or a certain group within mixed martial arts that I feel like, I don't know, as time sort of goes on, I feel like they're not quite as remembered as much, especially among newer fans. So I kind of wanted to shed a little bit of light on them, and then also just while at the same time sharing an important life lesson that I heard through a feature that included them one time. And what's kind of interesting about this episode is that it's kind of like a follow-up to the Bret Hart episode I did, as far as talking about what kind of an impact that friends can have on you in many different ways. And, just cards on the table. There were some things that I mentioned in that Bret Hart episode that I said, I couldn't remember what I wanted to talk about as far as the kind of impact that friends can have on an individual, and that if I remember later, I'll document it. But truth be told, I can't quite remember what it was that I wanted to mention that I didn't get to in that episode. So I don't really think that there's going to be any postscript thoughts, if you will, but I still think that it's important to have this follow-up, and I do consider this as the follow-up to that episode, because it's sort of talking about the impact that a friend can have on somebody in a different way, which I felt like was worth shedding light on. I mean, they're kind of similar, but also I feel like they're a little different. But I may have also mentioned this in the Bret Hart episode, or actually, you know what? It was the Kevin Randleman episode. I mentioned how there were some people who ultimately I'm just never going to get a chance to talk to as far as this podcast goes. And I may have threw out some names out there, but I'm not sure. I think maybe I mentioned this individual, but I might have not. But one of the people who falls under that category is Charles Lewis, who was one of the founders of the clothing brand Tapout, along with Dan Caldwell. They both went by names such as Mask and Punkass, respectively. And that is the focus of today's episode. What I'm going to focus on is just basically the story of Tapout, and something that Charles Lewis said one time in a featurette that Spike TV had for him back in the day, what is now known as Paramount Network. But as far as what Tapout was, I mean, they were the first major clothing brand for mixed martial arts. They were started by two friends who met through working in law enforcement or working as security guards, Dan Caldwell and Charles Lewis. And they got introduced to UFC through the 90s, and then in the late 90s, they actually started their own t-shirt company called Tapout. And eventually they brought on another member on the team. He goes by the name Skyscrape. A little bit of eccentric names here in with this group, and just I guess that's apropos with mixed martial arts. But anyway, so they were an apparel company, started out in 1997, and they started out very small. They started out in the SoCal area and just selling T-shirts in the back of their car, and the small MMA shows that were going on at the time. And they're just working their way up, and then eventually, I mean, with the MMA boom in the United States in 1997, that was around the same time that they rose to prominence. With the hit show that the UFC had at the time, The Ultimate Fighter, when that debuted in 2005, that created a whole new crop of fans that started watching the sport. And as you can imagine, with increased attention means increased dollars, and that's basically what happened. So from there, Tapout's profits rose and rose and rose. And it's just kind of interesting because, I mean, the way that you could look at Tapout is that, I mean, they were basically the Nike for mixed martial arts back in the mid to late 2000s. Sort of like the kind of recognition that Nike or Adidas has with sports, that's what Tapout was with MMA. And it became very symbolic, and it became very, I guess, how do I want to describe it? It became a staple for MMA. And I mean, it was pretty remarkable to see how this company grew because, like I said, Dan Caldwell, he grew up in the San Bernardino area, and Charles Lewis grew up in the same area. And then this was just basically a, you know, I don't want to say a pipe dream. I don't think that's the right word, but it started out as a dream, and it started out as this, just this passion project, and eventually grew into this multi-million-dollar business to the point where they made around $20 million in 2007, and then they were projected to make over $100 million over the next couple years. And I'm not gonna lie, I was very much into the Tapout craze. I mean, I had a couple t-shirts myself, and it's a little interesting because, I mean, I don't really know if it's something that I don't know if it's necessarily the type of t-shirt that I would sort of wear these days, but at the time, just with the whole MMA craze and it increasing, and then also just being 15 years old discovering the sport, it was right up my alley. But to be fair, I will say that the logo did look pretty cool because the guys who were running that company, they were big comic book guys, and I think I read somewhere a while ago that the logo for Tapout was inspired by the Batman logo. So there's some creativity there. And man, dude, it just seems like such a bygone era, just because it's just the sport was so much different at that time, and the environment for it was different, and just, I don't know, it just seemed like there was more, I guess, I'm not sure how to describe it, but and I've heard this in an interview before, is that had Tapout continued to be a prominent figure or prominent player within the mixed martial arts industry, it's sort of like the business would have taken a little bit of a different route as far as the sport or the companies taking care of the fighters a little bit better and maintaining their individuality and having a sense of humanity behind that, because that just seemed like the kind of person that at least Charles Lewis was, as far as just wanting to support people that he cared about, and just it seemed like he was a really great individual and a great person to be around and such. So I don't know, it's just so interesting, and especially, I guess, when you contrast that with like nowadays with the MMA scene, where before they had in 2015 UFC started with a Reebok deal, which made basically a standard uniform that all the fighters had to wear, and then eventually that deal expired and they did the same thing with Venom. It just, that era and the type of environment that the industry was at that time is in stark contrast to today, where it just seems like, I don't know, individuality is not really as emphasized or what have you. And just, I don't know, I would like to think that if Tapout was still around, or just rather to the same level that it was back then that would still be the case. And I don't know, but it just didn't work out that way. And it's also crazy to me because they were such a key figure within the realm of MMA, but then eventually that changed, because in 2009 what ended up happening was that Charles Lewis, Mask, he ended up dying in a car crash, and that happened on March 11th, 2009. So that took away 1/3 of the founding members and the key people behind Tapout, the others being Dan Caldwell, Punk Ass, and Skyscrape. And they still continue to be part of the sport for some time, but, and I guess doing my research about this and kind of like looking back on it a little bit, I guess that was sort of the thing that changed their trajectory for them, was the fact that, when Mask died, and he was one of the key figures for the Tapout company and the brand, that just really halted a lot of their momentum. And it just never really was the same after that, unfortunately. And what ended up happening was, like I said, they were still part of the sport in some way over the last, they were still involved in the sport in some capacity, but then in 2010, what ended up happening was that the founders, they sold Tapout to Authentic Brand Group. And this was something that I heard on this podcast where this individual, Mike G, it was the podcast was called The Other Side with Mike G, and Dan Caldwell was a guest on there. Basically, he was saying that what happened was that after the passing of Charles, it just sort of like the motivation to continue and build that business, it wasn't there anymore, and he just didn't feel motivated to continue being in like the focal point of the business without Charles being there. So 2010 they sold the company, and then eventually they just kind of become a generic fitness lifestyle brand, and they're not so MMA centric, not so MMA focused, and they're still around today, but the company's not what it used to be. And it's definitely not as prominent of a role, and just, I don't know, it's kind of interesting slash, I don't know, to be honest, a little disappointing that a company that used to be so associated with mixed martial arts is just not really a player in it anymore. But there's really no denying the type of impact that clothing brand had as far as being a key figure, and just what it did for fighters, because it even got to a point where Tapout even had their own reality show where they were looking for up and coming fighters to try to try to get them as part of the Tapout crew and all that stuff. And I'm saying the information about that show to the best of my ability, just because I never actually watched it. It's just from my research, that's what it was, is that they look for fighters to support and represent the Tapout brand and such. So, that's basically an overview of their history. And I guess where my sort of involvement, or not involvement, but I guess where my sort of, my personal touch or my personal experience with Tapout, like I said, buying the shirts and all that stuff, but it kind of extends beyond that, because the year after he passed away, that was when I was going through my own sort of turmoil and just my own sort of problems, and like trying to figure out what I'm gonna do with my life. And this was all in the 2010 time frame, and I just wasn't really feeling good about where I was at in my life. But through being able to be around certain, like by spending time with friends of mine and just being able to talk with them as far as the things I was going through, it just really helped out a lot. And I think honestly, learning about the type of person that Mask was, while also having that support, and just having that overall support in my personal life as far as my friends go, and then also hearing about Jens Pulver's experience, like I talked about in the previous episode, that just really, I guess that really helped me, and that really made me gravitate towards these individuals, because hearing about what they went through or how they thought, and just hearing the sort of hearing how motivational, I guess in particular, Charles was particularly uplifting and really helped me out quite a bit. And, truth be told, it was actually, I remember there was this tribute video that that this filmmaker Bobby Razik, I apologize if I'm not pronouncing his last name right, but he made this tribute video for Mask called "Simply Believe," and I remember I used to watch that a lot, like a whole bunch, but I haven't seen it in a very long time. But the the thing that was said at the end of that video is honestly one of the most inspirational things I've ever heard. And it just, I don't know, it's kind of weird because I'm saying how inspirational that was for me back in the day, but I don't know, thinking about doing this episode, doing my research, and even just right now, I'm sort of thinking that perhaps it's not something that I've really, I guess, abided my life by, or just really like continuously kept that in mind to like, make sure that I do live my life that way, and just sort of like, I guess the easiest way I could describe it is that I heard this very motivational thing back in the day, but it's just somewhere along the line throughout my life I've kind of forgotten about it, where just like, maybe I should be more mindful about it and keep that more in mind, so then I can live a happier and more positive life and all that stuff. So I just remember that really touched me quite a lot. Just basically talking about how, in that video, he's talking about how you just need to, you know, believe in yourself and just pursue these dreams that you have and such. And I know it sounds cliche because we've heard many people say it, but I mean, like, God, if you hear the way he says it, then you'll see how it's different. At least that's my opinion, and hopefully I can find that video one day. But on to basically the life lesson. And the biggest thing, I guess here's one of the big things that I take away from Charles, is that he passes away in 2009. And it's kind of interesting because this was at a time where the UFC wasn't having an event every week. So he dies in March of 2009, and then the first UFC event that they had after he passed away was in April of 2009, and they gave a little tribute for him on the UFC broadcast for the fight night event that they were having. And it was like a minute and a half, just sort of highlighting some of the things that he said, I believe, on the Tapout show that they had at the time. So at the end of that video, he says that, I mean, like, throughout the video, he's just talking about how he's like gonna support people and how he's gonna back them, and just how he wants to be, he wants to make somebody better than they thought they could be, and just really do what he can to motivate you and make you feel better about things. And at the end of that video, he says what it's all about, just something along these lines. What it's all about is that someone would just be a little happier because you're here. And that's what they end that tribute video with. And for me, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about that, because I think that is a very important thing to keep in mind. Because, I mean, here's the thing that I've learned as far as friendship goes, especially as I've gotten older, is that, you want to do the things that you can to, I guess, be there for somebody and help them out with things where you can. And those are important things. But I think it kind of extends a little bit past that. And maybe I touched on this a little bit in the Bret Hart episode, as far as talking about like how you never really know how you impact somebody. And it could be in big ways, it could be in small ways. But I guess, I don't know, maybe sometimes we just think about how we can be there for our friends in these big ways or these grand ways and all that stuff, when in actuality sometimes it's the little things that help out, and it's the small things that can help somebody out, or that we as friends to our loved ones can do for them. And to me, that kind of extends to just even these small gestures, these small instances where we can just help somebody get through their day, or just help out in some way that maybe we don't really, I guess we don't really think that it might be that significant, but in actuality it is a big deal, and it means so much to whoever we're interacting with, or whichever friend we're talking to and such. And that's kind of, honestly, I think that's the core of it, is that like sometimes in friendships or with friendships, it's not even these big things or these grand things that you do that help people out. Like sometimes it can just be as simple as somebody is just a little happier because you're there. And me personally, I can only speak about that from my own experience, because back in 2010, I mean, despite the extreme distress I was going through, and just like not knowing what I want to do with my life, or how I'm going to get out of the kinds of problems I'm having, I just felt happier talking with different individuals, and just, you know, being able to, I guess, express myself to them, and just having somebody hear me out made all the difference in the world, really. That's probably the easiest, or probably the best way I can put it, is just the fact that anything that I was going through kind of made it a little more tolerable, because I had the friends that I had at the time helping me out, or just, you know, willing to be a listening ear. Sorry if I'm coming off as repetitive. It's just, I don't know, I look back on that with a lot of, I guess I look back on that with like a lot of fondness. And, you know, I guess I also say that because sometimes maybe I feel like I wasn't there for my friends, or maybe there was like ways that I could have been there for them more. But I don't know. I guess this is more of like a, never take the opportunity to be there for somebody. You know, never take that for granted, because it could mean it could mean the world to somebody. Sorry, I'm flubbing my words a little bit. But yeah, it could mean a lot to somebody. At the end of the day, it just made something more bearable, and I felt like I could better handle things with that support system that I have. And just, you know, not even necessarily because they were like solving my problems, but just the simple fact that they were present in my life. And I guess that's something that I really want to articulate here, is just like being a presence in somebody's life can, even that can make a world of difference. And, you know, just generally speaking, this is kind of an extension of the whole idea of, you never really know how you truly impact somebody. Because it's like, I had that happen to me a couple months ago, where I had someone tell me how, you know, she has a, you know, she has a kid of her own, and just her sharing with me that, like, through going to concerts and stuff like that with this person, I was able to make the concert going experience for her son that much more enjoyable. And I remember at that time I was sort of thinking that, yeah, you never really know how much you can really impact somebody, or how much you can, I guess, make something much more enjoyable. And like, I don't know, I guess maybe it's because I think of the things that I did as just a small gesture. It's not that big of a deal, but, you know, to somebody else, it could mean so much more. And I guess you don't always realize that until it's like, you know, mentioned to you, or you're kind of like, you come to that own realization for yourself. But it's a good feeling. It's really nice. And I guess that's also another thing, is that, you know, that whole idea of somebody being happier just because you're there, you know, I guess that means a lot, because I've been on the receiving end of that back in 2010. And then I was able to do that for friends of mine just throughout my life. I mean, you know, I'm talking about this friend of mine, about her kid and about her son and her, and his concert going experience. So that's something that's happened over the last couple years, or just in general, talking with friends of mine throughout the 2010s, and just being able to be a support system for them. Like, I really liked doing that for people. And I guess I'm just hoping that I can continue that trend, and just that anyone listening to this can keep that in mind, and just really, I guess, be conscious of that, so then they can carry out their day and interact with their loved ones in such a way, and just, be a continuing source of that for somebody. I guess that's a big thing for me. 'Cause, like I said, I've just being a good friend to somebody, and just having that circle of really good friends has become really important to me as I've gotten older. I guess maybe it's just wisdom. Maybe it's just like, the realizations. I don't know, what do you want to call it? Epiphanies? I don't know. I don't want to make it sound too dramatic, but that's a big thing. And hopefully you guys can keep that in mind, and, go about your life that way and such. And, I guess thinking about that particular line that Charles said, I guess it's one of those things where it's kind of like, now that I'm older, I'm better able to see the significance of that, while also at the same time, just, once again, I feel like a lot of these episodes lately, like I'm just going to say this, doing the MMA episodes and the topics I've talked about, it's almost like every single episode has made me nostalgic, because it makes me think about my fandom or what I was going through at that time. And just this episode is no different, is that thinking about what Mask said as far as someone being happier because you're there, it just takes me back to that time in my life, and makes me kind of nostalgic about all that. And, I feel like this is also one of those things where this is not the only time I'm going to come back to. This is not the only episode I'm ever going to do on Charles Mask Lewis. There'll be other ones that I do in the future, because there's a lot to talk about with him, and I feel like there's a lot of life lessons. But, one of the things one of the sources that I've been using to get my information, I really want to credit. Like I said, it was called The Other Side with Mike G. And what's kind of interesting about that is that at the end of the video, he was, as he was wrapping up the interview, he was saying, I have no doubt someone's going to watch this and get something out of it. And when I heard that, I was just like, yeah, someone did. And I even commented on there saying that I'm going to, reference this info when I do a podcast. And, I don't know. It just, I guess that's another sort of instance of like, hey, this is a guy who made who posted this video months ago, and just kind of like, how many months has it been later that it's like, okay, even today, there's someone who's still getting something out of it, or still using it, or just like, yeah, it does matter to somebody. And, he's saying, he's saying like, oh, hopefully someone will watch this, or just, no doubt somebody's going to watch this and get something out of it. And it's like, yeah, that actually did happen. So this is the confirmation of that, basically. Yeah, I do miss that era, or I do miss, what Tapout used to be, and just, wish I got a chance to meet him, but, what can you do? But yeah. At least for me, Mask's impact is never going to be forgotten. With that, that's the last edition for MMA. And it's kind of interesting that I've been doing all these themes, or just like doing these themes the last couple months, is that it's, I guess one of the things, aside from just enjoying keeping up with these, I guess doing these episodes and having these themes for the last couple months. It's like, aside from actually enjoying it and just like, I've gotten joy out of it, it's actually made me pretty reflective of my own life and just made me think about, I guess, ways that I should be going about things or how I should be living my life or changes I need to make. And that's not really something that I was expecting to have happen. So that's kind of a nice little result to come out of it. So when the time comes that we have these again next year, I'll be interested to see how they play out and just how I can improve on them. But yeah, that is what I got for you for this particular episode. Once again, that brings a close to MMA, and I hope you enjoyed this, while also at the same time, like always, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for your time, thank you for listening to it. Leave a comment down in the comments section. Give me a follow on Instagram, Life and Combat Sports, and we'll talk again soon. Catch you guys on the next one. See ya.